Hey, thanks for joining me on Drive North with Meg Ellefson. Very happy to have joining me. Gosh, it's been a long time, Mr. Kevin Hermening, formerly of Kicking It with Kevin. Thanks for joining me, Kevin.
Well, thanks, Meg, and congratulations on your new gig. I know you
Yeah,
have a
well,
full-time job, of
yes,
course,
yes,
but
I've got that too, but
able to kickstart this, so to speak, over the last couple of weeks, and look forward
right.
to your success going forward.
Thank you. And, squeezing it all in while I can. Plus, I've got a band in the background. Just kidding, I do not, but it sounded like it, or maybe it didn't on your end. But so, well, a bit of time has transpired since you and I last spoke on air, and there have been some changes in your life, obviously, some exciting changes that and I mean, I wish I had been able to be the one to break the news when you announced that you were running for Congress, but let's talk about that to start with.
Well, last fall, when Governor Evers announced that he was not running for re-election, and we saw that our own Congressman Tom Tiffany was going to throw his hat in the ring. I got a lot of encouragement from people, friends, neighbors, even family members, who were encouraging me to seriously consider getting into the congressional race to take Tom's place in Washington. And a lot of prayer went into that conversation and discussion as well. And I did formally announce just last month, in the month of February, but I've been out on the campaign trail since October, visiting various organizations, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Lions clubs. One Boy Scout organization asked me to come in and talk about civics, maybe because they don't get a lot of civics training in school, who knows? But also of all the Republican Party events. It's a big district, Meg, 26 counties, and it requires somebody who has the energy. I think all of us in the campaign are getting out and about, but I think that I have the experience, which is really what drove me to get into the race formally. I looked at the field and it didn't look complete. It looked like we had a lot of people who decided they wanted to be a congressman rather than somebody who was wanting to serve. And I've been serving in a variety of contexts for the last 50 years. Since I joined the Marine Corps at the young age of 18, actually signed up, enlisted when I was 17, but my 13 years in the Marine Corps, my 40 years of driving roots into the ground in the district. And let's face it, nobody knows the people better than people who have lived amongst them for 4.5 decades, almost more than 40 years, actually. So I've heard from my neighbors about things they're concerned about, and I think that I'm the person to take those messages to Washington.
Well, you're definitely the well-rounded candidate, that's for sure. I mean, you have been involved in Republican Party politics for as many years as well, more than the number of years that I've known you. But I mean, I guess our association begins with the days of the Tea Party movement right here in Wausau, and I mean that was kind of a turning point then, and I mean, it's been great to get to know you, Kevin, and just know about your sacrifice as a well, and I know you refer to it as your service as a United States Marine, and and I guess I just want to take a few minutes to talk about how you believe that experience, being in captivity for 444 days, how that really shaped the course and trajectory of your life.
Well, I think it helped me to understand that those who want liberty and freedom um, know best if they've had to give it up. And I always talk about the fact that my experiences in captivity, they are not a reason to run for office or to start a business or to raise a family, but they give me a different context. And so those who've lost their freedom want to work hard to make sure that other people who thrive for freedom, they demand it, that they have that opportunity, but also that those of us who are here living amongst in a free society will never lose it as our citizens. We have a lot of threats across the globe, but you know, Meg, 40 years ago, I did run for this very seat. Ran for the House of Representatives against Dave Obey. And the voters back then, when I was a young man of just 26, they told me that I wasn't ready. They said, Kevin, we don't really know a lot about you. Why don't you think about putting some roots down, buying a house, having a family, maybe getting a job? And since the last 40 years, I've signed the backside and the front side of paychecks, which is important because it helps me to understand the regulatory burden and the laws that the government makes us live under. And they also said, why don't you consider getting involved in maybe running for something local? I have served for 16 of the last 32 years on the Mosinee School Board. So, if I were to wrap my campaign in a theme, I would say, I'm not running to be somebody, I'm running to get something done.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think the conversations that you and I have had over the years, especially during the course of during the pandemic, and how we talked about some of the leadership that you showed when you were the school board president, and frankly, you demonstrated that, and in my opinion, you were a model for other schools throughout the state during the pandemic, and how children, not only their educations but their mental health was greatly affected by the decisions that were made by our elected leaders, including Governor Tony Evers, and how the shutdown impacted children's learning in, well, we'll start with the Mosinee School District, but even around the state and around the country.
Well, it helps to have a good team. And we voted more than 20 times on issues related to COVID, whether it was about safety and mitigation, whether it was about hiring an additional nurse, which we did, onto our staff, whether it was putting in place protective shields. But most importantly, we gave our parents, our students, and our staff the choice as to whether they wanted to be masked up or not. And we were the only school district that I'm aware of in the entire state of Wisconsin that was mask optional during the entire COVID problems. And there were other issues, obviously, on the school board that I feel that my team and I, by that I mean my fellow board members, whether I was the board president at particular times, and yes, during COVID I had a 3-year stint actually as board president. My fellow board members elected me 2 additional years because that's how we vote for officers, 1 year at a time. And so 26 times, I believe it was, we voted on COVID issues. 25 of those were unanimous, and only one was not. So I feel really good about the leadership that our team put forth there. We attracted a lot of parents, a lot of students, well, parents who brought their students, their kids to our school district. Um, we knew it was unlikely to be permanent, although we did have about a dozen students stay after the COVID lockdowns in Wausau and Everest and Stevens Point and Marathon were over. But it gave our parents choice, and that's all we're trying to do is give our parents choices because they're the ones who should be leading education, not the establishment.
Well, and I think it really demonstrated, Kevin, that you had a hand on the pulse of the constituents in the Mosinee School District. And I think that that translates and is relevant experience when you are pursuing the candidacy of running for Congress, and how you have had this opportunity now to, beyond the Mosinee Wausau area, to talk with the constituents and to learn about what are priorities for them in this upcoming season. And I guess I'm curious to know what you're hearing from those that you're talking with in the seventh as you're traveling around the district and campaigning.
Well, it sounds cliche at this point because everybody's talking about it across the nation, the issues of affordability. But for me, it's not only the issues of affordability as it relates to housing and healthcare and job creation that allows someone to afford new things and homes and vehicles and to pay for the healthcare. But it's also about those who've lived here for 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 years. They're worried about whether they can afford property tax increases like we've seen happen. They are looking for some creative solutions to how they might be able to stay in their homes for all of their life. Um, Yes, some of them would like to see their children or grandchildren return back to their communities, but they would like to be able to certainly afford to go visit their grandkids somewhere else. And with the increased challenges that people are facing at the gas pump and the grocery store, and of course, the supply chain has been disrupted once again due to the recent war. Um, People are very worried. They're very concerned. And I also say to the folks to whom I'm speaking at these various organizations, lately it's been a lot of Republican Party dinners and caucuses because it's that season. And a couple of weeks ago, over in Neillsville at the 7th Congressional District Caucus, I talked about being ready on day one. I don't feel that I have to go to Washington and figure out how to get along with colleagues, although that would be my desire, but I don't have to figure out how to do it, especially those who are also vying for important responsibilities or sometimes people on the other side of the aisle, because I've done those things, Meg. I've done those things on community boards and organizations. I've done those things in business for nearly 40 years. And of course, I did it, as you mentioned, on the school board.
So you alluded to the war, and I presume you're talking about the war in Iran,
Mhm.
and I shared with you that I had posted something just recently on social media. It was a photo from my youngest son who lives in Milwaukee, and he was grumbling to me just recently about the gas prices, and then he expressed, and he's a Gen Z, and so it's interesting to hear the perspective because I believe that Trump at least attracted a lot of the Gen Z males in this last presidential election, and I mean, this is obviously anecdotal on my part because it's just my son and his friends that are telling me this, but they're frustrated. They express frustration about some of the campaign promises that President Trump made during the presidential election, and just about how he there weren't going to be any new wars, and th let's talk specifically about that because I feel like I need to be more informed about the decisions that were made, and it's obviously something that we well, I think we need to discuss because it's not as it's a complicated issue, and I think you are equipped to talk about this because of not only because of your experience in captivity for 444 days back in 19 I think 80 79 and 80, right? Am I right?
We got
But
out on 81 when Reagan took
okay.
office.
And then also your just your perspective in your career and how the war is also affecting prices in our country, and so I know it's kind of a long question, but I know you
It's
can
okay.
run with it.
Well, I would say, first of all, yes, you are absolutely correct. The issues, because there are multiple, are very complicated and certainly do not deserve a 30-second sound bite that we see with a lot of political leaders from Washington and Madison, for that matter, um, as it relates to the typical news media. Outlets like podcasts, like what you're doing here, are perfect opportunities for a little lengthier of a conversation. Let me begin by saying that the historical context of what's going on matters. It doesn't mean that the opinion, the perspective, the real lived experience of today's Gen Z voters and people, young folks, are irrelevant, because they're not. They're very relevant, and Donald Trump owes his election in 2024 to that voting bloc, particularly young men. I would add that there are some other things other than no new wars and the price of gasoline that the Gen Z males were looking for. They were looking for some masculine representation in Washington, D.C. because the young men were so emasculated over most of the last 20 years, nearly since 2008, in our society, by our educational institution, by our news media, by movies, by commercials, Meg. We see it everywhere. You and I have talked about this at great length over the last 15, 16 years that we've known one another. And that's really what, if I were to be asked what was the legacy of Barack Obama as president of the United States, he basically feminized males in our country. He said that, and his group of supporters said that young men aren't to be valued because their opinions are wrapped in masculine, toxic masculinity, and that's not how I saw it at all. The way, I mean, that is how I saw what happened, but that's not how I see young men in our
Mhm.
society. I see young men as having valid responsibilities in our society. Um, they're the ones who have to be part of, half a part of having a family, right? They're the ones who should have jobs. They should be in the workforce. They should be having opportunities to grow and expand. And um, we also know that by the science, boys and eventually young men and a little bit older young men still are still trying to find their way in the world. Um, and it's become more difficult over the last 20 years, or roughly 20 years. And I would like to see that change. And Donald Trump, he he tapped into that. Um, he understood what the young people were seeking, opportunity and a vision of the future. I think history is important because in this era of social media and TikTok and Instagram and all the rest, I'm mostly on Facebook because I'm older, but I'm familiar with the others because I have two daughters in their 30s and employees in their 20s. And so I'm familiar with these other venues also, but it almost forces instant gratification on society, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Um, yes, Donald Trump did a great job in his first 12 months of working to bring down prices on some things that had risen quickly. On everything else, here's one of the things Donald Trump always talked about: he's going to bring down prices, and people latched onto that language because
Mhm.
he said it over and over and over and over again at his rallies and at his debates and at news conferences, and he battered Kamala Harris over the head with it and affordability. And we saw what the Biden administration did in 2022. It's more complex to say, I'm going to reduce the increasing costs of living. In other words, bring down inflation rather than bring down prices. And yes, the price of eggs and the price of gasoline had come down, and now gasoline is spiking back up because of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz and the war. And I get it. But the trend is still downward. And once we get through this first part of the war and we can reopen the Strait of Hormuz again for the free flow of oil, um, I think we're going to see things come back to where they were just a few weeks ago. And because of instant gratification, people might say, oh, that's positive. That's a good thing that's happened. But then we have the war issue. And my position on this is that every president from Ronald Reagan to the first George Bush to Bill Clinton to the second George Bush to Barack Obama, even Trump in his first term, and certainly Joe Biden, they did nothing to stop the increased growth of the Iranian nuclear program. And it seems to me there is nothing that can possibly be more dangerous for the world, not just our allies in Europe, well, in Asia, in the Middle East also, but in Europe and in Asia, and ultimately maybe even to the United States, than a nuclear armed Iran. What would stop the Iranians from putting on ships a nuclear bomb, sailing it to Cuba or Venezuela, their allies in our hemisphere, and suddenly not having to launch it very far into one of our cities? And when I think about history, of course, I wasn't here when World War II was happening, but there have been multiple examples where our government leaders, Meg, knew that the Japanese were potentially going to hit Pearl Harbor, and there was no preemptive action taken. So I see what we're doing in Iran, at least the first couple of days, as preemptive against the nuclear possibility, a nuclear armed Iran. Um, Certainly, the Iranian people, as a group, a large group, a 90 million person country, is not monolithic or uniform in their support, with unanimity in support of the Iranian ayatollahs and mullahs. They would like to throw off the yoke of Islamic fundamentalism. But it's not our job to install the new leader of Iran. That would be one of the bigger mistakes we could make, is actually put somebody in power to take over their country, because otherwise 25 or so years, maybe shorter from now, we're going to be exactly back in the same boat that we're in now.
And so, I mean, your position is that this is necessary that we do this, and it's more preemptive, because some of the criticisms I've seen are that the the attack, the bombing in June of 2025, and I think these were Trump's words, completely and totally obliterated their nuclear program in Iran, and now, whatever it is, 8 months later, they're a threat again. And I guess I'm curious about how, I mean, how does one respond to that criticism, and or respond to that point, about, well, I thought it had been eliminated, and what are we doing back there again?
Well, neither you nor I nor the people who are talking about this have seen any
Have
of
been
the
there?
intelligence,
Okay.
nor have we been in the Situation Room, right? But the reality is that Iran um, has always talked about how they were not going to pursue nuclear weapons, but rather they wanted nuclear power. They said they couldn't launch their weapons long range, and yet they just launched one about 2,500 miles toward Diego Garcia, our bases in the Indian Ocean. Um, in any negotiation, in any conversation, you need to have two honest brokers. And it seems to me the Iranians have always lied and cheated and never really come to the table. Um, and it would have been much better if the president had, during the time when um, his leaders were over in the Middle East negotiating with Iran, in the month of January into the early part of February, if he had talked about what they're seeing as the true threat of nuclear weapons, if he had answered the question that you just asked, and a lot of people have, it might have been a simpler story to relate. But it seems to me the Iranians, whether it was at Natanz or any of the other bases, that their weapons were not really fully degraded. That's what it seems to me. Otherwise, what are we bombing?
Hmm. Well, and I guess there's a lot of, and naturally the mainstream media didn't cover this as didn't cover it well, I suppose, as they should have. But the jubilation from the Iranian people when this occurred, I mean, I think that in and of itself was very telling.
Well, it matters. It points to the reality that there are a lot of people who are opposed to the regime, but there are a lot of people after 50 years who've um, been they've been controlled for so many decades. They have not had exposure to outside ideas outside of Iran. A big part of their population is still extremely poor, without access to modern technologies. Not saying they don't have electricity, but it doesn't mean that they have access to the internet. They certainly haven't had access to Western news. And so a lot of this is new for them. And that's why it's like a cornered rat, right? It's going to fight for its life. And that's really, I think, what's happening right now, whether it's the IRGC or the Basij Corps or the remaining remnants of the Islamists. Um, Not everybody's gotten on a plane yet with $500 million and fled to Moscow, like Bashar Assad did from Syria last year. year and a half ago. But we see increasing signs of the collapse of the regime. I hope that there is a plan to provide encouragement. And, the president, he told the Iranian people, what, 2 months ago already, more than that, to be patient, that, freedom is coming. And, the other thing you talked about your son and his buddies, I mean, it's true. Um, with the way the media and the Democrats in particular portray what's going on, they scare people into believing that we're going to have a draft, that everybody of that fighting age is going to be called up and they're all going to be put on ships and they're going to be, or on planes, and they're all going to be transported over to the Middle East and they're going to have boots on the ground. Um, it seems to me that we clearly already have some type of special forces, boots on the ground already. Um, but I don't see this as another Iraq or Afghanistan at all.
When you learned of the initial action bombing on Iran, did it evoke um, emotion that perhaps maybe was in a way vindicating for you, that finally, after all this time, I mean, after, the fact that you were in Iran during, during well, obviously you were in captivity, but just at that time of peril in the Middle East, do, I guess, do you have a sense of optimism that, boy, things are, after all these years of waiting for some sort of action by the United States, or I don't know, I already used the word vindication, but vindicating action. Did you have some kind of hope that you hadn't expected you would have in your lifetime?
Um, I think it would be. I think it's incorrect to say that I had a sense of, and you didn't use this word, so I'm going to use it instead, a sense of joy or happiness or encouragement. I do have encouragement for the people of Iran, but I don't see how. I mean, if you want to see a textbook case of why the Second Amendment is so important, the Iranian people are not armed. They don't have hunting rifles, and they don't have shotguns, and they don't have pistols. I mean, they're not prepared to lead a revolution from inside like the revolution happened in 1979, because it was the opposite then, where the Iranian army joined in the effort to take over the embassy. And all, I mean, our job was Marine. I was the Marine security guard. Our job was to follow the orders from the ambassador, and Ambassador Langen ordered us to lay down our weapons. Marines, yes, we are part of the Department of Defense, but Marine security guards actually work for the Department of State. So we're at a diplomatic mission, not a military installation. But the Iranian military joined the protesters and joined in taking over the embassy. So right away, the people themselves then had weapons. That's not the way it is over there now. So they're trying to change a government against a cutthroat, ruthless regime that, by the conservative estimates, about 35,000 people have been massacred by the regime for having gone to the streets to chant death to Khamenei. I mean, we don't exactly use that language here, death to Trump, but, some of the language, some of the memes, some of the Democrats' rhetoric, the
Hmm.
leftists on left-wing media, they might as well be saying it, right?
Right, right. And it certainly doesn't discourage it in their words or in their behavior or thoughts. So, do you? And I mean, you've touched on it, and I mean, I didn't mean to suggest that anyone was jumping for joy in the United States. That, well, I mean, maybe there were some that we were taking action in Iran, but I do. Um, I'm curious too about the conversations perhaps that you've had with your fellow Marines in which you were in captivity, and have you had an opportunity to talk with any of them and just share some of your sentiments about this action that's going on in present day.
Well, just a couple of them. We're not really all together in a group chat. A few of us are, three or four, three right now. But I would say that um, those people who have worn the uniform of our country are the people who are the least likely to want to commit troops. And I know you've heard that over your lifetime, Meg. You've read that. You've heard veterans talk about that. And so it needs to be almost a last resort or preemptive. And so hopefully the president is getting the counsel that he needs from experts, not those looking to just make a name for themselves. And so I trust that this crop of military leaders, our generals, our senior colonels, that they are giving good counsel. It's not going to be unanimous. The president is still the commander in chief. It's one of his most solemn responsibilities to make that decision to commit troops. For me, it was kind of like when we went into Iraq after Kuwait was invaded. And I'm sure you remember watching those images, Meg, of our brave troops on the highway, the dirt highway from into Baghdad, where they stopped at the leadership of General Schwarzkopf, right at the gates of Baghdad, and did not go in and confront Saddam Hussein, but rather weakened his army and his control over his country. Um, Back then, I remember, so for 20 years, people would ask me all the time, well, why didn't we take out Saddam Hussein right away? And the reason was, it was very clear, because if we had removed Saddam Hussein as the leader of Iraq, we would have created this void in which Syria and Iran would have been able to quickly flow. And it would have been more chaotic and much more difficult for the world to really enjoy something that people ridicule the rationale, and that is the free flow of oil through the Persian Gulf. We need that oil as a society. I don't just mean the United States. What's going on. We need all sources of energy, but certainly on the global stage, our country and the world quickly shuts down without the free flow of oil. And the Iranians were allowed to own it and control it during all of this time before the war, but now they're trying to control it as a weapon, and that is not going to stand. It's not going to stand by our allies who are standing by us in order to keep that open, but neither is it going to stand with the United States. But to me, it was a sad day. I remember getting emotional when I saw the troops going into Baghdad, into Iraq in 1991. And I got called up and activated. I had to go and spend about a month almost down at my reserve base, um, and support those who were called up and sent overseas. But it was sad also that Saturday when the president committed troops just in late February. But as I said earlier, necessary if all of the news is right.
So, and there are some reports that, and again, I mean, I always try to take everything that I read or hear, um, with the idea that we are more than likely not getting all the information. We're not. You mentioned earlier we're not in the Situation Room, but is it is it possible that despite the fact that we were told back in June of last year that all and any nuclear capabilities were destroyed and obliterated. I think that was obliterated was the term that Trump used. That they would have indeed been able to develop a long range weapon that could potentially, well, obviously harm one of our allies, and that's why we acted as we did a few weeks ago.
Well, I think all of our allies. I mean, look at what's going on already, even with their drone attacks against their Arab neighbors. Um, the Arab neighbors of the country of Iran have always been suspicious of the Islamic Republic. They have never trusted the Ayatollahs and the Iranian presidents to keep their word. And they were told that they were not going to get dragged into this conflict and yet some of the very first places that the Iranians attacked, um, other than Israel, were their nine, I think, seven or nine Arab neighbors. And so they're all now engaged in the war effort. They're all committed to helping the U.S., but mostly to defending themselves, which I think is first and foremost the responsibility of a nation. I think that's the responsibility of the United States. And your son and a lot of his friends, a lot of people, I see the same thing on social media all the time. They're wondering why this is our fight. And I would say this is a preemptive effort to protect the United States of America.
All right. Well, and that is precisely what I wanted to hear, but or at least I wanted to get your take on this. Um, you talked about how the Iranian people don't have the capabilities that they once did to defend themselves and really carve out their own new government. Is it our responsibility to help them in that respect to give them the tools to be able to establish a form of government that is not oppressive to the people of Iran?
Well, it depends on what you mean by help. Do we install the next leader? That would be one way of helping. I don't think that's what we should be doing. Um, Trying to gauge just how much support the Crown Prince, the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, has would be important, is important. How do we gauge whether or not the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago, whether she has a natural political coalition that she can bring together to bring about change in Iran or not? Um, I think it'll end up being probably a coalition of four or five, maybe six entities, which might even be opposed to one another and might even have room for an Islamist in it as well, to at least provide the idea, not just an image, but the real idea that the Iranians could very well bring about some sort of self governance. Make no mistake, if the Iranians are moving in the direction, hopefully, of a representative republic or a democracy, um, it's going to look very different than ours.
Mhm.
Ours is still messy, for crying out loud, 250 years later. It seems to have gotten messier over the last 15, 20 years, but it's still messy, and there's so much still up in the air about what the next 250 years is going to look like. But I certainly hope it's going to be one that is going to be providing opportunities, educational, economic opportunities, an emphasis on personal responsibility. And I would also add the reality that we have to, as a nation, protect ourselves from enemies, foreign and domestic.
Okay, so let's bring it closer to home again, speaking of domestic,
Please.
and talk about your campaign. I know that I'm trying to think. Sometime in April, I want to say maybe April 23rd, there is the first of what I hope are many debates scheduled in Mercer, if I'm not mistaken, right? And which county party is it again? I can't remember which county party.
That's the Iron County Party on
Iron.
April 22nd. But also, there's going to be one, I believe, on April 13th,
Oh wow.
which is going to be in Price County. And then there's one tentatively scheduled. I haven't gotten a final confirmation, but on May 14th, over in Vilas County,
Oh, that's great.
at Northland Pines High School is the tentative location on the evening of May 14th.
Wow, that's excellent. Well, I hope that both of you, both of us, being residents of Marathon County, citizens of Marathon County, that perhaps there might be one here as well. I mean, it would. I think it would be ideal to have an opportunity for all five of the candidates to share their perspective, their platform, their what their credentials are, what their experience is, what their any kind of relevant experience and qualifications to those that are observing these debates, and I look forward to it. I'm glad that I wasn't aware of those other two, so thanks for letting me know about it. I hope something happens in Marathon too.
Yeah, I think something will. I would say that even though The events have been organized by the county parties. The county party is not going to provide the moderator. Rather, they're looking to have local media folks. I know people from WJFW, TV 12 in Rhinelander is interested in participating. I believe there is a radio station or a newspaper. Actually, there is a moderator now that I think about it. Bruce Marcus from the
Mhm.
Eagle River radio station will be moderating the one in Mercer, perhaps the one in Eagle River, his backyard. But we'll see over time. I do believe that Marathon County, there will be an event there. I'm starting to hear that perhaps West Politics might be involved in that one, along with the local TV stations. We'll see. But there should also be one over in actually, there should be one in all 26 counties, to be blunt. There should
Agreed.
be an opportunity for the voters to go as close to where they live to observe the candidates face to face, head to head, talking about why they believe, why we believe, why I believe, in my case, am the best person to represent them in Washington, D.C., starting next January after the November election. Big primary in August, of course, but
Mhm.
we'll see how that goes. And then we move on to the general election in November.
Can we quickly touch on the no endorsement situation that occurred at the 7th District Caucus a few weekends ago, and really whether or not it's relevant or important that those who are most active and involved in the county parties and within the district, their endorsement wasn't sought. However, the endorsement of those who reside and do not vote in our district, some of whom have weighed in on this race, and how whether or not it's that important, whether or not endorsements are important at all, period.
Well, they're important. I'm going to, this very week, actually, be rolling out 4 endorsements from local state representatives, people who not only live in the 7th Congressional District, their assembly districts are in the 7th Congressional District, and they are the people who their voters have chosen as their closest statewide representative, right? Or state representative. And so I'm going to be rolling out those endorsements this week. I'm very excited about that. I'm going to be announcing a couple of sheriffs in a couple of weeks who have agreed to endorse our candidacy. Again, local, right? Um, People have asked me, you didn't come out and ask whether it's important that Mr. Alfonso received the president's endorsement.
Mhm.
I'm just going to bottom line say that we were not at all surprised by that, Meg. Um, we aren't connected to the president the way that Sean Duffy onto Michael Alfonso is connected. Sean Duffy sees the president of the United States almost every single day in the Oval Office. And so if I were Sean Duffy, I would be trying to help my son-in-law too, but it more than likely would be to get elected to something local, like I did, and the voters asked me to do 40 years ago, maybe a state assembly seat or maybe a school board race first.
Well,
But
let's
that's a
look at
different
Tom Tiffany.
conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, Tom
Tom
Tiffany's a great
Tiffany,
example.
right?
He was a
He is.
town of Rice supervisor. That was his first elected position. So, I mean, it really does, and it's not necessarily about holding office first in order to get elected as much as it is about relevant life experience and qualifications. I mean, I guess that's where I stand as a voter and as someone who owns property in 2 different counties in the district. So it's important, and I think it's something worth talking about and worth asking the questions and in really expecting the candidates to step up and answer the questions that we're asking.
Well, Meg, as you know, because you've been watching the last month and a half of the election, um, it's actually not about age. It's not. It's about relevant life experience. Who
Mhm.
has the most, not in length necessarily, but the most applicable lived experience that is similar to the people that we are asking to vote for us? Um, I in the late 1980s, my late wife was uh, found to have had a pituitary tumor, and it was preventing her from being able to get pregnant. It happened to be when I was between jobs. And so I did not have health insurance. We did not have health insurance. So she went in for her surgery, and we incurred a nearly $200,000 medical bill that took me 18 years to pay off. Um, it's the way it is if you have a life experience that doesn't go your way, right? And I know a lot of people who've had to pay medical bills. It's what I do for a living is financial advising. I help people figure out how to save enough money, where best to save their money for retirement, all in the context of whether they're paying a medical bill or they got in credit card debt, they made poor decisions, and now are they going to be able to save for their future? Sometimes their children get in trouble, and what do? We help our children out to the best of our ability. So I have that lived experience. I took a third shift job in 1995 at a paint factory in Schofield because I was trying to shore up my new self-employment gig. Um, and that became an opportunity for me to really understand how I needed to double down and focus on my business, which after I quit that third shift job at Powder Technology in Schofield, it really gave me a renewed focus in business. Um, Losing my wife a few years ago, having to pick up those pieces after more than 40 years together to make sure my daughters and myself and my friend group, you included, Meg, would be able to continue to persevere. It happens to every married couple. We just don't know which one. Um, it's not about moving on, it's about moving forward in life and understanding that God has a purpose for our lives. And I don't always know exactly what God's purpose. I rarely know what God's purpose for my life is. I do my best, but persevering through faith and um, resilience in life, that's the message that we're communicating. And it's what I hear from so many people across the seventh district. They say things like, Kevin, you have a lot of experiences similar to myself or my neighbor or my sister or my coworker. Um, and I think that they recognize that every single day in Washington, D.C., I'm going to show up for them. And at the event just a couple of weeks ago that you asked about, the caucus, when there was the no endorsement vote, at the end of my speech to the delegates before we wrapped up for the day, pretty much, I said to the delegates who were assembled that win or lose, one thing they can be sure of, I will be at next year's caucus because I will continue to live here. I will continue to own my business here. I will continue to see my grandson here because this is my home and it has been for 40 years.
I'm so glad you brought up your grandson because this isn't just about the adults in the room, frankly. It's also about future generations. I mean, that's why I got involved all those years ago in the Tea Party movement, is because I wanted to carve out a better path for my children and for for my children's children, for future generations. And I know that that's another part of your motivation for running for office, is that you're looking you're looking at future generations of your legacy, your family, and future generations of your family.
Well, it's true. I mean, here we are nearing the end of the podcast today, and we're actually getting to the actual answer to the question, Kevin, why are you running? Right? I'm running because I have a 2.5-year-old grandson, and someday when he's a little bit older, my daughter, Caitlin, is going to tell her son, my grandson, what his grandpa, he calls me Pa, what Pa did to protect his country when he was a young Marine of age 20. And not so long after that, I'm pretty sure he's going to come up to me, you know, tug me on my elbow and say, Pa, or ask me, Pa, Mom told me what you did to protect our country, but what did you do to save our country? And that's a big part of the reason I'm running. And to put one other fine point on it, Meg, um, in 1981, when I got out of captivity, I feel that God gave me a second chance at life. I had a roommate there for 6 months, Bill Keel. And Bill would always say to me, Kevin, when we get out of here, he was an educator, so he never said if. He was always encouraging me. He was the age of my dad. He said, Kevin, when we get out of here, go on and finish your education. Go to college, get your college degree. Kevin, get involved in your community and build a life of relevance. And I feel that God gave me that second chance at freedom and at life. And so, really, the second reason I'm running is to pay tribute and honor to the 3 Marines and the 5 Airmen who sacrificed in the deserts of Iran back in 1980 to give me hope that even though they didn't succeed in mission, they succeeded in giving me hope that my country had not forgotten about me.
Oh, Kevin, I don't think anyone could ever forget about all the contributions that you have made to our community and beyond, to our country. And I'm so grateful that you are rejoining me in this new endeavor on my podcast on Drive North, and look forward to continued conversations. I am anxious to hear how the debates went. Maybe you can pop in and update us on that, and just really
Okay.
what you're hearing in the district. I'm so grateful for your time today, Kevin, and really grateful that you're willing to again put yourself out there to serve our country. And I know you said in your announcement that it's not something you were expecting or looking to do. It's just you felt called to do it, and so very grateful that you did.
Thank you, Meg. Being elected to office is supposed to be about service. And would kind of be an opportunity for me to continue to serve.
Kevin Hermening, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it very
Thank you,
much.
Meg. Have a great
God
day.
bless.